So the question is where SoL came from or where it began, and I'm going to tell the story from the time that MIT had this Center for Organizational Learning and how it became SoL from there. There's a whole other story prior to that that's very important to know, but that's the part I'm going to focus on. It's more of the part that I was part of. So basically when Ari and Peter began to work on developing this toolkit for these times, and in particular for the organizations like Ari's that needed them, it was a very rich time for them because of what they were doing and the promise that it represented. There were many organizations that began right at the beginning with them at the Center for Organizational Learning at MIT. Places like the Department of Defense, Intel, Shell has been there from the start, Ford Motor Company, lots of very large organizations, National Security Agency, large organizations that were part of the pooling of the experimentation. So they had projects that they would do together, and they would learn across sectors and across organizations. And MIT housed it, but the problem with that, and there was a lot of research. There was a very rich research facility with that. The problem with that is that it was housed in an academic institution, and there were many constraints that didn't allow the kind of experimentation that was wanted. It was within an academic system. So they decided to leave MIT and to retain and to become Society for Organizational Learning. There was a whole process of finding that title. They worked with Dee Hock, who created Visa, and had talked about chaotic systems, and because they knew they needed a system, a structure that was consistent with the aspirations of SoL, not just any structure. So we began as a chaotic organization with a vision and in a way that would allow self-organizing all over the world. This is what happened at Visa, was a remarkable ability to organize people locally toward a unified goal or end. So one of the things that emerged when that change happened was that along with organizations, we already had the organizations and the practitioners within them sharing stories and results and experiments. We had a very rich research base of people studying that and bringing research to it, taking research from it, and cross-pollinating and offering papers, and that was very important. That is a very important part of SoL. And then when they left, they were allowed to actively bring in a third component, which was the consultants, who are like honeybees. They're going among many organizations. They're not in one culture, they're across a number. So they're also practicing the tools in a variety of organizations and being able to bring that back together with the researchers to be able to very quickly, or more quickly than they would have without each other, begin to build stories about what was happening and what could happen. So that became Society for Organizational Learning with 3 very active members. The board, the council of SoL was composed of 5 members of each of those constituencies. They were pretty well balanced. There were 18 organizations or so. There were 100 consultants and 100 researchers. And basically what happened is that the consulting group began, this was in founding SoL, began to grow, and the research group began to shrink. And so in a sense, the balance wasn't quite the same, although a lot of the consultants were doing research. It wasn't classic research that was being done. And so there, again, we were at a transition point, a very important transition point. It wasn't the balance of the original design, and yet that was what was happening. That was who was being attracted. And so what happened during that time is we looked again at new forms for SoL. Organizations were pulling back. It was now 2008. There were a number of organizations that couldn't sponsor their participation the way they used to, and organizations were changing. So the whole system was changing, the whole field. So we started to reinvent new forms for SoL to take. And the one that I'm most excited about is that this was an opportunity for SoL to emerge as a truly global organization. I mean, an explicit, intentional global organization where we no longer had founding SoL and members of that based in Cambridge. We now have people all over the world who have been practicing in their cultures, in their countries, in their regions, who now could literally show up, become visible as communities. So we created SoL, the Global Association of SoL Communities, which does not have individual members. It has community members, member communities, and each community has within it its own membership structure, it's very chaotic. It's a way that each country can create an entity that's consistent with and resonant with its own area. And the hope there, the aspiration there is that this experimentation, the tools, the principles will continue to evolve in a living way, and the research will be done such that we can all learn very much across boundaries. And I think in the end, we believe that we are a fractal of the world, we're a microcosm, and that as we do this in our field, that the larger field, that in it, just by itself will impact a larger field as well, reflect it and allow whatever's happening here to actually happen out there and vice versa. So that's where we are now. That's where we are. Where we have a number of we have an emerging global association of SoL communities. Founding SoL has become SoL North America, and we're just at the beginning of that journey. We are not. If you're looking for that to be all stable and ready, well, maybe it never will be, but right now we're emerging that way. We have a number of communities now who are recognized communities, and we have a whole group of them that are emerging out in the field. And we have a very simple structure by which they can become part of, or process by which they can become part of a recognized global SoL community. And so we're hoping that you're either part of that or that you want to make that happen where you are.
Mm-hmm.